Hello, you hardworking students. Today we are talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is Mr. Fredericks, and let's get this party started. So, this is a long story, like most of the stories we talk about, and it was an absolute Cold War disaster. Now, the biggest disaster of the Cold War, at least the closest we ever came to blowing up the entire planet. So, nuclear war was so very close. Now, who was responsible? Because, I like to blame people when things go wrong. And the answer is in the Cold War, there were two sides, and those sides were led by John F. Kennedy, president of the US, and Nikita Khrushchev, president of the Soviet Union, or should I say premier. Now, Castro of Cuba is going to be kind of held in the middle, so I want to blame him as well. But we'll see. Now, why Cuba? Why would I blame Cuba? Well, that's kind of what this crisis was about. Cuba itself was an island specifically right next to the United States, dangerously close, probably about 91, 92 miles from Florida and the area of Miami. And come 1962, that's going to become very relevant when the Soviet Union puts nuclear-tipped missiles in Cuba. And this is going to make the United States entirely upset and fearful of nuclear war, the fact that these missiles were there. So this Cuban Missile Crisis, what exactly happened? Well, you can't know unless you look at the history. So history provides the context. So once upon a time, in the 1800s, there was the country of Spain, and Spain used to be super powerful, particularly after Christopher Columbus, sailed the ocean blue in 1492. They established a massively huge empire in the New World, pretty much made up of North America, Central, and South America. Now, most of this empire had rebelled, and they had left Spain behind as of the late 1800s, but not Cuba. Cuba and a couple other places still were part of the Spanish Empire. But in the 1890s, Cuba said, us too, we want out. So Cuba decides to have a revolution. Now, things didn't exactly go well. Here's an image of one of the Cuban Revolution amongst his people that had been burned and put in a mass grave. So this revolution was anything but okay. So now at this point, that picture made the United States super upset. And they're like, we need to defend our cousins over in America as well, Cuba, the Caribbean. So to help, we launched the Spanish-American War. Now, it's not as simple as that. There are some other complicated factors, but we're there to support the people of Cuba, and the United States dominates the Spanish-American War. It was truly a splendid little war. So we struck a deal between us and Cuba after that war, and to some extent before the war, where we said, Cuba, you can have your freedom. We're going to beat up Spain, but we're not just going to take you. This isn't about imperialism for us. Instead, the United States says, we want to be your friend, kind of a euphemism for economic imperialism. So the idea is the U.S. gives Cuba their freedom, but we end up owning 40% of their sugar plantations, 95% of the cattle ranches, 95% of the mines, and all of the oil refineries. So we were getting rich off of this friendship with Cuba. You could call them maybe, in our sphere of influence. So a deal was struck, but that deal basically left the Cuban people in poverty while the U.S. benefited. So they're not so happy. Fast forward 40 years in the future, come 1940, and a guy named Batista is the president of Cuba. Now, the Cuban people don't love him because he seems to rule with an iron fist, a little abusive, and they kind of are stuck in perpetual poverty. But the U.S. loves Batista because, of course, he continues to allow the United States to economically imperialize, if that's such a word, the Cuban people. But most importantly, Batista is anti-communist at a time when the communists were on the move and growing in power. So we didn't so much care about the whole democracy thing and power to the people. We cared that communism wasn't growing. So we had our priorities right, certainly. So Cuba, not so happy. And then suddenly the anger is going to flame up in 1958 when a guy named Fidel Castro starts to lead a revolution against Batista. Just prior to that, he had applied to go to Yale University, which had rejected his application. Historians always wonder if he had only been accepted, perhaps we could have avoided all this mess. But instead, he wasn't allowed to go to that Ivy League college, and he said he did what anybody else would have done. How about I take over my country? Seems like a good reaction to not getting into college. So either way, the revolution is upon him, and he is successful. After a year and a half of revolting, he takes over Cuba, and there he is, super happy, and Batista, is gone. And all of Batista's supporters immediately are hunted. Over 10,000 are reportedly executed. Batista's supporters lined up, killed. Now, if you take over a country, you certainly want to punish the people that have been oppressing your people. You also want to prevent a counter-revolution, so he's getting rid of his enemies. Now, the problem is that all the family members and friends and those that were able to escape flee and they go to Florida. Now, that's why today often Miami is nicknamed Little Havana, because there's such a high Cuban population there, Cuban American. But these Cuban Americans in Florida are sitting there as Castro solidifies his power in Cuba, and they just get angry and angrier. Their country was taken, their families were executed, their friends were executed. That brings us to 1958 to be precise. Castro is now a new leader of the world, and Eisenhower is wondering, who is he? Is he a communist? Is he a friend? Is he a friend or an enemy? But then Castro did 4 things that kind of made it Eisenhower realize that he might just have been a communist and an enemy. Number one, the Agrarian Reform Act. Castro says if you own over 3,333 acres of land, it's going to be taken and given to the country itself and to the poor people of Cuba. So people lose their land. Now, there's no richer country that has more land than the United States. That makes the rich unhappy and the U.S. unhappy. Cubans themselves gain lots of land. They are happy. The United States, not so much, because, again, we were the richest people in Cuba. So at this point, land reform makes Eisenhower think Castro might just be a communist. Now, might just be an enemy, but we'll wait. We're patient. Number 2, all apartment buildings in Cuba basically were owned by a landlord, a wealthy landlord, and landlords, of course, take lots of rent from the people that rent all of those apartments. And these new owners, what Castro did was he gave all of the people that were renters ownership over their apartments. So the tenants, had no money, and now all of a sudden they're helped. But the rich people that owned the entire building now lost everything. So this sounds like, pretty good for most poor people in Cuba, certainly not for the wealthy. And Eisenhower's like, well, that's kind of a communist policy. That wasn't fair. Seems to be maybe a possible enemy to capitalism, maybe the U.S. The number 3 action that Castro took, Cuba needed some weapons, because who doesn't these days? And they said, well, I'm not going to buy them from the U.S. like Batista did. I'm going to buy them from my good friend, the Soviet Union. And anytime somebody's buying weapons from your enemy, you're not too thrilled. And the United States starts to panic about this. We've seen this before. Khrushchev and Castro seem to be getting on pretty well. So this makes us think that, wow, he might just be a communist. But the final nail in the coffin would be the 4th action Castro takes, and that is it's going to get the U.S. pretty angry. So gasoline, is pretty much in the ground, and it's filled with a lot of crud, but you have to pump it up, and that's hard to do. And then you got to ship it, hard to do. And then you got to put it in a refinery to get rid of all the crud to make gasoline. Well, the thing about this is U.S. refineries were in Cuba because we were friends with Cuba. But the thing is, those U.S. oil companies that have refineries in Cuba are going to have an issue. And the issue is that they needed oil. And they traditionally got their oil from Venezuela, a U.S. ally. But the problem is Cuba's like, I don't want oil from Venezuela. Instead, in 1960, Castro demands that oil does not come from Venezuela. Instead, it comes from the Soviet Union, his new friend. He's trying to hook up the Soviet Union with some business. U.S. companies, which are in the middle of the Cold War, right? They say, absolutely not. These are our refineries. We're not going to take Soviet oil. Absolutely not. No way. Castro's like, okay, then I'm not going to deal with you anymore. And he gets angry and he nationalizes the U.S. refineries. What exactly did he do? He went into the refineries and kicked the U.S. out and said they now belong to me. Technically, nationalization is entirely legal, that all the land really belongs to the country itself. And if a country can take that land back, in the U.S., according to the Fifth Amendment, if the U.S. does use eminent domain to nationalize something, they have to justly compensate you for it. But not in Cuba. Castro took this land and gave no compensation whatsoever. Land gone, money gone from those U.S. companies. Eisenhower's like, absolutely not. This is not okay. You are an enemy, Castro. You are a communist. And Castro actually, about this time, announces to the world that he is a communist. No reason hiding it anymore. Him and Khrushchev are best buds. In fact, he always says, I always was a communist. I just kind of kept it as a secret so the U.S. wouldn't bully me. But come 1960, Eisenhower is like, I need to do something. I am a Cold Warrior, and I can't allow communism this close to the U.S. So we got to take Castro out. Now, later on, the CIA will try this operation called Operation Mongoose. This is going to be kind of our passive-aggressive way to take Castro out. Operation Mongoose, it's kind of a metaphor. Castro would be a cobra, the deadly cobra. And if you know anything about cobras, they are deadly. They can take down anything with their venom, except a mongoose. A mongoose can take as many bites from a cobra as possible. The venom does not kill the mongoose, which makes the mongoose the number one predator of cobras. So Operation Mongoose, basically, which is going to come up later to take out Castro, we started funding, or should I say the CIA started funding, anti-Castro revolutionaries. We put salt secretly in his clothes, hoping that would cause his beard to fall out. It was kind of an iconic beard for Castro. We basically turned to air, LSD, and released that into Castro's media room so that he would be tripping on acid. When he spoke, it would sound like an idiot that nobody would support him. We put poison in cigars and sent them to Castro so that he would be murdered or killed. We put TNT in cigars and sent them to Castro so he would just blow up when he lit up. But we even paid off assassins, former lovers of Castro, to kill him. But that didn't work out either. We sabotaged the Cuban industry to hurt him economically, whether we slashed tires or put sand in the Cuban gas tanks. And we thought all of that would hurt Castro and lead to a revolution or something. Total fail. It didn't work. You could ask whether the United States should be trying to take out leaders of other countries, even if we don't like them. Back in the 60s and 50s, the answer was yes. We did that in Iran, and we did that in Guatemala, and we tried to do it in Cuba. But Eisenhower at this point says, you know what? No, I'm going to try a more direct approach. Those other approaches were pretty much during the Kennedy administration. But Eisenhower's like good old-fashioned invasion. He's coming into Cuba. Now, he doesn't want to get caught because that would make us look like Hitler, right, if we invaded a small country. And we don't want to get the Soviet Union mad at us or the world. So we're going to try to do this secret. We're going to keep it quiet. So we're not going to use U.S. troops because that would be blatant that it was us. So instead, we got to use somebody else. And what we choose, Eisenhower's plan to invade Cuba and get rid of Castro, is to use Cuban exiles, those same people that were Batista supporters that fled Cuba and ended up in Miami. So the idea would be that this would look like a Cuban revolution with the U.S. having nothing to do with it. But it's not. So it's not going to be a U.S. invasion. So the CIA was really good at this. So they grabbed up 1,400 Cuban exiles, transported them to Guatemala, and gave them weapons and training and said, we're going to launch you into a counter-revolution. But the thing is, Eisenhower was running out of time. You can only be president for 8 to 10 years, 2 terms. And in 1961, Eisenhower's term ends. Kennedy takes over. Now, Kennedy, on his first day in office, the CIA comes in and says, Eisenhower and us, we're working on this. We need you to approve this plan. So Kennedy looks at Eisenhower's CIA plan, and part number 1, we're going to take Cuban exiles, but the problem is there's only 1,400 of them. They're going to be vastly outnumbered. Castro's military will crush them. But if you look at Eisenhower's plan, he knew it. So it was going to be based on U.S. air support, U.S. planes painted as Cuban revolutionary planes to take out Castro's Air Force and his forces so that our Cuban exiles would be successful. Kennedy, it turns out, against this part of the plan. We'll talk about why later. But part 2, the Cuban exiles were going to be weak. They were going to be outnumbered. We talked about this. But with only 1,400 men, Eisenhower's plan is based on attacking Havana itself, the capital of Cuba. The reason is the attack would be in daytime because that has so many people in Havana. That's where most Cubans are. And so many of them must hate Castro and must hate communism. Those are both assumptions. That if we attack near those people, they will hop in on our invasion. So it won't be 1,400 Cuban exiles. It will be hundreds of thousands that join in the Cuban exiles. The point of the exiles is to start the revolution, not finish it. They will create a spark that will turn into an explosion of anti-Castro craziness. Now, Kennedy's against this part 2, specifically attacking Havana during the daytime. Now, let's dive into that. Eisenhower's plan is to attack Havana, again, in part because of the mountains that are near Havana. Now, he thinks that the Cuban exiles are going to be outnumbered. They need a little time to get going. It's what's better than if you get into trouble to hide amongst the hills, the mountains, the caves. That way you can keep fighting with guerrilla warfare. Kennedy says that's what I don't like that part of the plan either. And so let's go into Kennedy's thoughts. He wants to keep this a secret. He doesn't want to get caught. He doesn't want to look like Hitler. He doesn't want to get the Soviet Union mad at us. So he's worried that we're going to get caught under Eisenhower's plan. So Kennedy says, I'm going to fix and change the plan. Number one concern is U.S. air support. If we're flying an endless number of planes bombing Cuban, it's not like military planes grow on trees. So it's going to be obvious that they're U.S. planes and not Cuban revolutionary planes. We're going to get caught. So Kennedy says, I've got an idea. Instead of attacking Havana, let's attack this place called Bay of Pigs. If we attack from the south on the Bay of Pigs, there's an airstrip right there. The Cuban exiles can seize the airstrip, and then suddenly it makes sense that hundreds of U.S. planes are flying around pretending to be Cuban planes. So that is how we can do this. The U.S. planes will look like rebel planes then. We need to attack a place near an airbase, Bay of Pigs. Second fix of Kennedy, of Eisenhower's plan. Eisenhower's plan said, let's attack during the day in Havana. Kennedy's like, no, we want to attack at nighttime. That way it will make it easier for us to hide, sneak into Cuba. We don't want to get caught. Sneaking in is a huge element of surprise. So, boom, that we're going to change it from a daytime attack to a nighttime. But it turns out these fixes are terrible. The whole attack was predicated on creating a spark. Our 1,400 exiles weren't going to be able to get it done. So how can you possibly create a spark at nighttime? Everybody's sleeping. So, and also the attack at the Bay of Pigs is in the middle of nowhere. This is a picture of that area. If you attack at day or night and nobody is there to see it, how can they hop in? So Kennedy's changes are going to doom this invasion. Now, another problem of changing the plan was when Kennedy changed the attack from Havana to Bay of Pigs, there's no mountains on that bottom. Look, there's mountains all over Cuba to support guerrilla warfare, but there's no mountains near the Bay of Pigs. So that's going to prevent them from hiding, spreading out, lasting. Guerrilla warfare gone. The Cuban exiles will be trapped if anything goes wrong. So, but maybe I'm just being negative, pessimistic. Perhaps these changes will help. Perhaps Kennedy's a genius. So let the invasion begin on April 17th, 1961. We attack at the Bay of Pigs, and of course the invasion begins. Apparently it had some spiders, I don't know. But anyway, the U.S. planes are supposed to support the invaders. But the thing is, they're supposed to attack transportation, slow down the Cuban forces, attack Cuban air bases so that the U.S. and the Cuban exiles would have control of the skies. Very important, and pin down the Cuban military so they can't immediately crush the forces. But almost immediately, some U.S. planes get shot down, I think 2 or 3, and Kennedy gets nervous. If our planes get shot down, they'll see the planes, they'll know they're U.S. planes, we're going to get caught. Unacceptable. So Kennedy actually calls off the airstrikes. These were the airstrikes that were supposed to destroy the Cuban Air Force and maintain control of the skies. The problem is now Castro's planes completely just dominated the sky. And with no air support, almost the opposite, the invading weapons carried on a float for the invaders actually got destroyed by the Cuban Air Force before they even got onto land. So how are you supposed to keep fighting and give time to create a spark and for the other Cubans to hop in if you don't even have any weapons to begin with? So immediately this becomes a total failure. No air support, no weapons, and the Cuban exiles get surrounded almost immediately. And they get captured, as shown in this picture. Captured again, boom, done. Here are some Cuban fighters basically taking a picture in front of the shot down U.S. plane. Apparently it's a pretty excitable thing to dominate the U.S. in a war. Here's another guy standing on top of a U.S. plane. So not so good. The U.S. is massively embarrassed. The invasion is a failure. The U.S. looks weak. Kennedy looks weak. And Cuba, happy. They just took out a superpower. So what happened to the Cuban invaders? Well, they were sentenced to 30 years in prison. But the U.S. Cuba agreed to send them back to the U.S. for $53 million. But the U.S. was unwilling to give dollars, so he said, we'll give it to you in food and medical supplies. And ultimately that worked. So Castro at this point, happy but spooked. Maybe the next time Kennedy's going to send U.S. forces, which Castro knows he can't defeat. So at this point, Castro isn't worried about another invasion. So he asks the Soviet Union, please give me some nukes, please. And the Soviet Union now has to wonder, should they move nuclear weapons off their country, which they had never done before? So they have to make a decision, and ultimately Khrushchev says yes. So in 1962, Khrushchev moves a lot of nuclear missiles into Cuba, and Castro now has his missiles. He's happy. Now, Khrushchev didn't give them to Castro. The Soviet Union would still run them, but within Cuba. So at this point, why would Khrushchev suddenly be emboldened enough to do this? Because part of the reason is he met with Kennedy, and at the Vienna conference, he absolutely pushed Kennedy around. He yelled at Kennedy, demanded things of Kennedy, and Kennedy just backed down and appeared weak. So the Soviet Union and Khrushchev thought if he pushed Kennedy, Kennedy would run away and let Khrushchev get away with whatever he wanted. Now, Eisenhower was tough. Khrushchev never would have tried it against him. But he's like, I can boss this guy around. I mean, Kennedy is the age of Khrushchev's grandkids. He's like, I don't have any respect for this guy. So the Soviet Union secretly starts moving nuclear missiles to Cuba. A couple months go by, and construction of these missiles is underway because nuclear missiles absolutely take a lot of construction to set up. But as these months are going by, on October 14th, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis begins. The U.S. is flying U-2s over Cuba to basically take pictures and figure out what's going on there because they are now an enemy, right? A communist enemy. And what these U-2 missiles show is nuclear missiles in Cuba, and a lot of them. They were officially Soviet R-12 missiles, which were super dangerous, 77 times more powerful than what was dropped in Hiroshima. So this is a big deal. The U.S. is worried. Now, how did the U.S. fail? Well, like we had a gun pointed to our head, that we can't let the Soviet Union do this, that they're a bunch of jerks for trying. These are offensive missiles going to be used to just crush the United States, offensive missiles. But what should we do about it? So this begins the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy versus Khrushchev. Now, another reason why Khrushchev did this was Khrushchev was upset that the U.S. had nuclear missiles in Turkey, right next to the Soviet Union. So there's Turkey, and if you look closely, the reason the U.S. put missiles in Turkey was part of NATO, our military alliance, and in order to protect Turkey from communists, we put nuclear missiles there to fire at the Soviet Union, which was right next door. So the Soviet Union knows how it feels to have missiles pointed at them. So the missiles in Cuba were a way to even things out a little bit. But why did we care so much? The Soviet Union had so many nuclear missiles. Why does it matter where they are, where their ICBMs are? And the answer is because their nuclear missiles in the Soviet Union couldn't reach the U.S. However, the missiles in Cuba could reach almost all of the United States, pretty much everywhere except Seattle and maybe San Francisco. But what to do about these missiles? Well, Kennedy panics, and he forms this group, basically an executive committee of the National Security Council, nicknamed XCOM, and these super smart people had to come up with a plan to recommend. Now, they only got 13 days to act because the missiles right now aren't operational. We can do something right now, but after 13 days, Cuba and the Soviet Union have all the leverage in the world because the missiles will be ready and they'll be able to blow us up if we do anything. So we have to decide quickly. So these are the four best options that XCOM comes up with. Let's look at all of them. So maybe the most popular idea, actually overwhelmingly, was an airstrike. These missiles threaten the U.S., let's go in there and destroy them immediately. That's what should happen. But there was some hesitation about blowing up these nukes as they're being constructed. Number one, it would be perceived as a sneak attack. In war, you're supposed to be very noble. You're supposed to declare war and fight in an honorable way, face to face, not attack somebody when their back is turned, like the Japanese did to the U.S. during Pearl Harbor. So that's an unfair contest, not noble, not so good. So a lot of people oppose this airstrikes for that reason. Next, if we go to blow up these missiles and we miss just one, if we get 99% of the missiles but we miss one, they can launch that one and blow up D.C. and every person in it. That is we're talking about millions killed. World War II is the worst war ever, and we only had 292,000 people killed in it. Imagine now that many people being killed in 5 minutes. We can't miss even one. And we will miss one. There's no way a surgical airstrike will be 100% successful. We don't even know where all the missiles are. So missile strikes also will result in Soviet soldiers being killed. We're not just going to blow up missile sites, but the Soviets that are running those sites. And now we will have killed Soviet soldiers, which will lead to the Soviet Union retaliating against us where we're weakest, most likely Berlin, West Berlin, because if you notice, West Berlin's completely surrounded by them, they'd have the advantage. Now, the U.S. is weak in West Berlin, so if West Berlin's attacked, that means West Germany's attacked. West Germany is part of NATO, and that if NATO is completely outnumbered by the Soviet Union in Europe, so that the NATO agreement calls for us defending those countries with nuclear weapons because we don't have enough troops to defend them. So you get it, an airstrike results in the Soviet Union attacking West Berlin, us dropping nuclear weapons on them, and now we have nuclear war. So Kennedy thought an airstrike was the worst idea ever. Now everybody's like, no, this is what we should do. We have to blow up the missiles. And Kennedy's like, are you kidding? You need to think about long term here. So airstrike, Kennedy's like, no way, even though his military is like unanimously saying, got to do it. So then Kennedy's recommended, how about we invade Cuba, which would be an airstrike followed by an invasion. So the problem with an airstrike alone is, once again, if you miss one missile, you're done. However, and then you have nuclear war. But even if you got 100% of the missiles, they could just add more in later, right? So the idea is that an airstrike is ineffective because they'll just add more later. So the solution is we invade after the airstrike so we can seize and find any missiles that are left. We also prevent any more missiles from being put in. But it's the same problem. An airstrike and an invasion is going to result in the Soviet Union having their men killed, their soldiers killed, and they're going to retaliate in West Berlin, which we are required to use nuclear weapons to defend, and that is a nuclear war. So Kennedy doesn't like a full invasion either. So how about we talk it out? We hug it out at the United Nations. That's what it's for. Ally Stevenson recommends, I think we should talk and negotiate with the Soviet Union. Ally Stevenson is a credible person. He ran the Democratic Party from 52 and 56 because he ran for president. But this is seen as a bad idea by ExComm. This looks like appeasement. The Soviet Union is doing something evil. You can't respond to evil by giving a gift to the Soviet Union, by negotiating, talking it out. No, we stand up to them. We punch them in the face. That's what we need to do. Also, people agreed that talking would be slow. And during that time, the missiles would become operational, and then we lose our leverage. So once again, you can't appease the enemy. It just makes them more aggressive. We have to punch them, destroy them, force them to get these missiles out. Again, also, if we go to the UN, it ruins our element of surprise. Remember, if we do want to bomb these missiles and destroy them, we don't want them to know we're coming because then they could defend them, right? So no, if we're going to invade Cuba, we don't want them to know we're coming or they're going to kill more of our soldiers so they'll be ready for it. So no, Stevenson, we're not going to talk this out. We're not going to go to the UN. You're an appeaser, bad choice. So that's a terrible idea. Final choice, how about we just do nothing? Enjoy peace, embrace peace. But if we do nothing, then these missiles will become will become ready to go. And we have missed our opportunity to prevent nuclear war. So that is bad. Also, why is having missiles in Cuba so bad? Let's remind ourselves about that. Because both countries let me explain why missiles in Cuba is such a terrible thing. Both countries have a lot of nukes. Both countries have the ability to destroy each other. So there's only one thing keeping us safe, and that's a concept called mutually assured destruction, shortened to be MAD. And what this means is that we don't have nuclear war because of MAD. MAD is, the concept of MAD is that, yes, the Soviet Union can launch nuclear weapons at us, but we will then launch back at them and destroy them. So why would they do that? Why would we ever attack the Soviet Union? Because they'll crush us with their nukes. So the thing is, MAD counterintuitively keeps us safe because we know we'll kill each other. However, you know what gets rid of MAD, which would lead to nuclear war? Putting missiles in Cuba. Because putting missiles in Cuba means they'll be so close to the U.S. that they can launch them and destroy us before we ever have a chance to fight back. And that gives the Soviet Union first strike capability. First strike capability means we can't fight back, and that means the Soviet Union might just be able to win a nuclear war by taking us out quickly. And if they can take us out quickly, they might just be stupid enough to start one. And that is why we can't allow first strike capability, which is what missiles in Cuba probably give them. It gives the Soviet Union a chance to win a nuclear war, and they might just be crazy enough to start one in that case. So first strike gets rid of MAD, can't allow it. So let's review. Something has to be done. But doing nothing might result in nuclear war. Going to the United Nations might result in nuclear war. airstrikes will lead to nuclear war for certain, and airstrikes and an invasion will lead to nuclear war. So Kennedy thought, wow, I'm just going to die. We're all going to die. My military is crazy. My advisors are crazy. Please give me another option. And he ends up getting one. So the other option that nobody thought of was a blockade. Let's blockade Cuba. Put ships all around it and not let any other ships in. No more nuclear weapons are allowed in. Now, we're going to call this a quarantine because technically a blockade is an act of war, and that would make the U.S. look wrong and like we violate international law. But if we change the word to quarantine, everything's all set now. So why is a blockade a good option? Well, it's a sign of strength. So it's no longer appeasement. We won't look weak. Number two, the Soviet Union actually has options. We're going to push them, but they can actually respond with a non-war option. It allows them to back out and save some face. Because if we strike these missiles and kill Soviet soldiers, they're going to be under pressured into fighting back, and that's nuclear war. So the other thing about the blockade is it allows no more missiles in, so at least we don't let them, a lot of the missiles that were in Cuba demand more parts in order to be functional, and we don't let them access to these parts. They can't set them up ready to fire. Now, why is a blockade bad? Well, it does nothing about the missiles already there that are under construction and they're going to be ready to go soon. And also, it's a slow option. So it's going to allow them to focus on fixing it's going to allow them to basically construct the missiles that are already there. And before we ever solve this crisis, they're going to be able to launch those nukes at us. Remember, right away, within 13 days, we have the leverage because those missiles are not operational yet. So we need to act fast, and a blockade will be slow. Some military people say that a blockade is entirely a weak response. They're doing something evil. They're ready to blow us up with nukes, and we do a blockade rather than blowing up their nukes. So no, this is not a strong response. So the blockade begins. We put ships all around Cuba. We tell the ships we're going to contact the Soviet ships, tell them to stop. We're going to board them. If we find nuclear missiles, we're not going to let them in. And that's the blockade. Now, the Soviet Union has 26 ships en route for Cuba at this point, and they're coming towards our blockade. Now, are they willing to stop? Khrushchev says, no, U.S., you have no right to stop our ships. We can send nukes wherever we want. We're not going to stop. The U.S. says, you're not going to get by. We'll destroy those ships. Soviet Union says, well, then we'll destroy your ships. We're not stopping. We're not letting you by. We're not stopping. We're not letting you by. The whole world is knowing that the moment those Soviet ships don't stop, we're going to have a nuclear war, which is going to kill just about everyone. So both sides are being stubborn. The world is scared. The U.S. is driving the world close to nuclear war, or maybe the Soviet Union is. Nobody's backing down. Finally, Khrushchev is getting ready to run the blockade. His ships are coming so very close to the blockade. The whole world's watching. The ships are 10 miles away, 5 miles away, 1 mile away. And Khrushchev is like, crap. If I run this blockade, the world is going to be nuked, us and them. We all lose. And Khrushchev immediately starts thinking, any fool can start a war. But the problem is, once a war is started, not even the smartest men can stop it. Once people start dying, the war just is out of control. It's a monster. So Khrushchev has an impossible decision, backing down to the U.S. or starting a war that he knows he won't be able to stop before hundreds of millions of people die. So at this point, we're eyeball to eyeball. His ships are right next to our blockade. We're ready for nuclear war, ready for World War III. And Khrushchev makes the decision to turn his ships around. So we live to fight another day. We are still alive. The world breathes easy for a moment. We stood up to the Soviet Union. They backed down. This is the greatest moment ever. But the problem is we're celebrating too early. The missiles are still there. The ones that already made it to Cuba. They're under construction. Now, at this point, the world is angry. How is the U.S. driving everybody to this point of nuclear war? So the UN at this point, there's no longer a secret, so there's no reason not to debate it at the UN. The UN and the Security Council are listening to the Soviet Union say that the U.S. is driving us close to war. Basically, one motivation of the Soviet Union to put these missiles into Cuba is that we tried to invade it with the Bay of Pigs. These are defensive missiles, not offensive. Now, the U.S. says, I don't care whether they're offensive or defensive. You can't have nuclear weapons in Cuba. I don't care what you say at the UN. So basically, the UN is debating this, and the US says, get them out. So one thing we did at the UN was we showed pictures of these nuclear weapons. And again, their response was, no, they're there to defend Cuba. You tried to invade Cuba. They're justified with having these. So at this point, the US says, you've got 3 days to get them out. And it will no longer be a blockade. It will be a US bombing and invasion. Get them out now. Now, to prepare for this invasion, we need more U-2 flights over Cuba to show us where all the missiles are, right? So this leads to crisis number 2. That blockade was crisis number 1 when we won. Crisis number 2 is one of our U-2s gets shot down. This is only the second U-2 ever to be shot down. The Gary Powers U-2 incident 2 years earlier was the other one. But our U-2 taking pictures, shot down. And we have one person, the American in it, can't parachute out. He is killed. So now the generals, the Joint Chiefs of Staff are saying to Kennedy, you have to respond. Have to. You can't allow a U.S. military person to die and not retaliate against those missile sites. And I'm going to say that this is the best moment of Kennedy's presidency. He says, no. Yes, our military person got killed, but no, we are not going to attack. That will be nuclear war in World War III. And he stands up to to the Joint Chiefs, says it's not happening. And at this point, Joint Chiefs are like, you're crazy. How could you not defend our pilots by when they get shot down, basically going in and attacking? So I'm going to argue that Kennedy is a great president because of this moment. I'm going to argue that any other president, under the full pressure of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all of his advisors, would have gone in. I mean, our military person was killed, so you would think that Kennedy would have gone under pressure, or any other president, to go in and start a war, but he didn't. Now, hours are still going by, and we get to within 24 hours of the invasion point, and when we're going in there, and World War III is going to begin, and then a letter comes in from Khrushchev. The letter comes in, and it says, I have seen World War II. I cannot have World War III. Please, this is terrible. Once we start war, we're not going to be able to end it, Mr. Kennedy. Please. So I have a deal. Why don't you promise the U.S. never to invade Cuba, and then I will remove my missiles? That's what the offer is. And it's absolute victory. We stood up to the Soviet Union. They got rid of the missiles, and all we have to do is promise not to invade Cuba. What a win. We are happy. This could not be better. World War III is not going to happen. But the problem is that night goes by, and a second letter comes in, much more formal. And now it's the same deal. The U.S. says we're not going to invade Cuba, and we'll remove the missiles. But in addition, the U.S. has to get rid of their Turkey missiles, has to get rid of their nuclear missiles in Turkey that are pointed at the Soviet Union. And this destroys everything. If we do that, if we agree to this deal, the U.S. looks weak. It looks like the Soviet Union did something wrong, and to get them to back down, we gave them something. It looks like the Soviet Union threatened the U.S., and now we betrayed Turkey to save ourselves. This is appeasement at its worst. And that's the lesson we learned from World War II. You can't appease a bully, or they'll keep pushing us around over and over again. Why won't they just put missiles back in and then say, all right, if you want us to take them out, give us something else? We can't do that. So Kennedy gets an idea, though. He says, how about we publicly agree to the first letter and secretly agree to the second? So the final deal is that the U.S. announces publicly that we will never invade Cuba or help an invasion. And the Soviet Union will remove the missiles in response. And 6 months later, we secretly communicate to Khrushchev, we're willing to remove those missiles in Turkey. We're willing to say yes to you, but nobody can ever know about it. So you get what you want, but you can't take credit for it. And if you ever try to take credit for it, we'll keep the missiles there. So at this point, that deal is agreed to. And the Soviet Union announces that they will remove the missiles, and they start removing them. And we then publicly say we're not going to invade Cuba or try to get rid of Castro. And secretly, we remove our missiles in Turkey 6 months later. Now, you could make the case that those missiles were old and obsolete anyway, and we were planning on removing them anyway. But either way, we removed them and gave the Soviet Union what they wanted. We got a deal. We avoided World War III. We avoided nuclear war. Now, Curtis LeMay, the Joint Chief in charge of our Air Force, called this the greatest defeat in U.S. history. We did exactly what Neville Chamberlain did to Hitler 20 years earlier. We basically appeased the Soviet Union. And that's going to make the U.S. look weak, and they're going to keep pushing us. Now, the other point of view is we avoided World War III. Kennedy avoided nuclear war. He perhaps saved hundreds of millions of lives. I call that a win, and I think that makes Kennedy one of the greatest presidents we've ever had, just these 13 days alone. Now, the public deal, again, I could argue that we were the winners. In the private deal, you could argue we were the losers. But either way, crisis over. This was the closest we ever came to nuclear war. There were a couple other close calls, but never as close as this. So what's the legacy of the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, Cuba remained communist. We didn't get rid of them. They remained heavily armed for the next 50 years. Now, they didn't have nuclear missiles, but heavily armed without them. We established a hotline between the White House and the Kremlin so we could communicate with them at any time. One part of communication that was hard was that they were asleep when we were awake and vice versa. It was tough to talk. And next, the superpowers started to move towards a peaceful coexistence model. We started to learn the lesson that just because you hate someone doesn't mean you can't find a way to live with them. You don't have to always talk about trying to destroy an enemy. Perhaps you can just live on opposite sides of the world. And that's going to work towards a concept of détente that's going to come up soon, a movement towards peace. Now, we also launched a Cuban embargo. We basically, Kennedy stops travel to Cuba and also stops trade to Cuba. The idea being that we're going to punish Castro by not allowing any trade. Economically, that will destroy their country and they'll overthrow Castro on his own. But it never really worked over the next 40 or 50 years. But it was a good try. Khrushchev ultimately is going to lose his job. He was perceived as weak and replaced. And he's going to be replaced with a much hardliner named Leonid Brezhnev. And ultimately, the Soviet Union decides they will never find themselves in a position of weakness again, because the Soviet Union was behind at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. They had to back down. But then they start speeding up the amount of nukes they create, and they will pass the U.S. in the 70s. And that arms race really gets going. So the Cuban Missile Crisis, thankfully, was solved with peace. And I think there's a lot of lessons about how to maintain peace that we can take from Kennedy. Look for your assignment in Google Classroom, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.